Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her back against the cold metal wall of the research ship. Her left arm hung useless at her side, broken when the alien soldiers had thrown her against the control panel. Blood dripped from a cut on her forehead, but she ignored the pain. She had more important things to worry about. The ship was dying around her. Red warning lights flashed in the darkness. The air tasted of smoke and burnt metal. Through the holes in the hull, she could see the stars spinning slowly as the ship tumbled through space. The artificial gravity had failed an hour ago, and now everything floated in the air like a terrible dream. Elena pushed off from the wall and floated toward the communications room. Behind her, she could hear the clicking sounds that the hegemony soldiers made when they talked to each other. They were getting closer. She did not have much time left. 3 days ago, everything had been different. Elena and her team of 17 scientists had been studying old ruins on a dead planet at the edge of known space. They thought they were looking for ancient art and maybe some old technology. Instead, they found something that would change everything. The ruins were not just old buildings. They were a massive library hidden deep underground. The walls were covered with writing in dozens of different languages. Some Elena recognized from other worlds. Others she had never seen before. But the translation computers on the ship were very good, and slowly the story began to make sense. The library told the story of the Hegemony Coalition. For 300 years, the galaxy had known them as peacekeepers. They were the ones who stopped wars between different species. They helped planets join the galactic community. They protected weak civilizations from stronger ones. At least that was what everyone believed. The truth was much darker. The library contained records of dozens of civilizations that had simply disappeared from galactic history. Entire species had been wiped out, their planets sterilized, their cities turned to glass. So Hegemony had done all of this while pretending to be the galaxy's protectors. The worst part was how they did it. The Hegemony would arrive at a planet and offer help. They would set up schools and hospitals. They would share technology and knowledge. The local population would welcome them as friends. Then slowly, things would change. First, the Hegemony would suggest that the local government needed to be more efficient. They would offer to help run things better. Soon, Hegemony officials would be making all the important decisions. The local leaders would find themselves pushed aside. Next came the cultural changes. The Hegemony would say that some local customs were dangerous or primitive. They would start schools that taught children to be ashamed of their own history. Old temples would be torn down and replaced with Hegemony buildings. The final step was always the same. The Hegemony would discover that the local population had some genetic flaw or disease that made them dangerous to other species. They would quarantine the entire planet for public safety. Then the ships would come and the planet would burn. Elena had read file after file of these extinctions. 63 different species, all erased from existence. Their only crime had been trusting the wrong people. The evidence was overwhelming. Video recordings, genetic samples, even confessions from Hegemony officials who had grown sick of the killing. Elena's team had worked for 3 days straight, copying everything they could find. They knew this information had to reach the rest of the galaxy, but the Hegemony had been watching. The attack came without warning. Elena had been in the ship's lab when the alarms started screaming. Through the windows, she saw sleek black ships dropping out of hyperspace. They were beautiful in a terrible way, like sharks made of metal in starlight. The research ship had no weapons. It was built for science, not war. The pilot tried to run, but the Hegemony ships were much faster. The first missile hit the engine room. The second and third tore holes in the hull. By the time the boarding pods attached themselves to the ship, 12 of Elena's team were already dead. The Hegemony soldiers moved through the ship like death itself. They wore black armor that seemed to absorb light. Their weapons made no sound when they fired, but everything they touched simply stopped existing. Elena had hidden in a storage closet and watched them kill Dr. Martinez. One moment he was there, trying to surrender. The next moment there was just empty space where he had been standing. Now Elena floated through the wreckage of her ship, trying to reach the communications array. Most of her team was dead. The few who were still alive were prisoners. The Hegemony soldiers were searching the ship, looking for the data that Elena's team had stolen from the library. She reached the communications room and grabbed onto a broken console to stop herself from floating past. The main transmitter was damaged, but the emergency beacon was still working. Elena pulled out the data storage device that contained copies of everything they had found. Her hands shook as she connected it to the transmitter. The upload would take several minutes. Elena watched the progress bar creep slowly forward while the sounds of the search grew louder. The hegemony soldiers were checking every room. They would find her soon. She thought about her daughter back on Earth. Maria was only 8 years old. Elena had promised to bring her something special from this trip. Now Maria would grow up without a mother, unless someone stopped the hegemony from killing more innocent people. The upload finished with 30 seconds to spare. Elena quickly programmed the transmission to send to every human world in the galaxy. The message would take months to reach some of them, but it would get there eventually. She was about to send the data when she realized something was missing. The files proved that the hegemony were murderers, but they did not explain why this mattered to humanity. Most humans lived safely in their own space, far from hegemony territory. Why should they care about aliens being killed? Elena thought about the children in the files. Alien children, but still children. She thought about parents who had watched their families die, about civilizations that had trusted the wrong people and paid with their lives. She thought about her own daughter, growing up in a galaxy where monsters wore the masks of heroes. With shaking fingers, she added a personal message to the data package. This is Dr. Elena Vasquez of the research vessel Kepler's Dream. We discovered proof that the Hegemony Coalition has been systematically murdering entire civilizations for 3 centuries. They are coming to kill us now, but the evidence must survive. Please, someone has to stop them. The galaxy's children need you to be their guardians. This is our SOS. Humanity's children need you. She hit the transmission button just as the door to the communications room exploded inward. 3 hegemony soldiers floated into the room, their weapons already charging. Elena looked at them without fear. The message was sent. The truth was out there now, traveling faster than light toward human space. One of the soldiers spoke in the clicking language of the hegemony. Elena did not understand the words, but she understood the meaning well enough. She closed her eyes and thought of her daughter one last time. The weapon made no sound when it fired, but across the galaxy, monitoring stations were already picking up her transmission. The message would reach human space in 18 hours, and when it did, the galaxy would learn why humanity's most feared armada had been built in the first place. The SOS had been sent. Now Elena could only hope that someone would answer. Admiral Marcus Kane stood in the command center of the dreadnought Ragnarok's Edge, staring at the holographic display that showed Dr. Vasquez's last message. The blue light from the projection made the scars on his face look deeper than they really were. Those scars had been earned 15 years ago during the last time the Retribution fleet had been deployed. Kane was 58 years old, but he looked older. Command of humanity's most feared armada had a way of aging a person quickly. His hair had gone completely gray and his eyes held the weight of decisions that had shaped the fate of entire worlds. He had hoped never to use the fleet again. That hope was now dead. Play it again, he said quietly. The hologram shifted and Dr. Vasquez's voice filled the command center once more. Kane had heard the message 17 times now, but each time it hit him like a physical blow. The desperation in her voice, the knowledge that she was about to die, the simple faith that someone would answer her call for help. Commander Sarah Chen stood beside him, her own face grim as she watched the data scroll past. She was Kane's second in command, one of the few officers who had served with the Retribution fleet during its last deployment. She knew what this message meant as well as he did. The data checks out, sir, Chen reported. Intelligence confirms that 63 civilizations have disappeared from galactic records over the past 3 centuries. The timing matches the hegemony's expansion perfectly. Kane nodded slowly. He had suspected something like this for years. The Hegemony Coalition had always been too perfect, too convenient. They appeared whenever there was trouble in the galaxy, always ready to help, always successful in their peacekeeping missions. No government was that competent unless it was cheating. What about the research team? Kane asked. All 17 confirmed dead, sir. The Hegemony reported it as a tragic accident. Engine failure, they said. The ship supposedly drifted into a black hole. Kane's jaw tightened. 17 scientists, murdered for discovering the truth. Dr. Vasquez had died sending her message, hoping that someone would care enough to act on it. She had been right to hope, but Kane wished she had been wrong. The Retribution fleet had been built after humanity's first real contact with alien civilizations. Early human explorers had been naive. thinking that intelligence automatically meant wisdom or morality. They had learned better when the Centauri Empire decided that humans would make excellent slaves. The war had lasted 8 years. Humanity had been outgunned, outnumbered, and fighting for survival against an enemy that saw them as nothing more than useful animals. Traditional military tactics had not been enough. Humanity had been forced to become something darker. The Retribution fleet was the result. 12 massive dreadnoughts, each one carrying enough firepower to sterilize a planet. They were crewed by volunteers who had lost everything to the Centauri Empire. Their families, their homes, their faith in the basic goodness of intelligent life. All they had left was rage and the will to use it. The fleet had ended the war in 6 months. They had not bothered with military targets or strategic objectives. Instead, they had gone straight to the heart of the Centauri Empire and shown them what total war really meant. By the time the Centauri government surrendered, their homeworld was a ball of radioactive glass and their military was scattered debris floating in space. The galaxy had learned an important lesson that day. Humanity might be young and small compared to the great civilizations of known space, but they were also absolutely ruthless when pushed too far. The Retribution fleet had become legend, a story that parents of a dozen species told their children to make them behave. After the war, the fleet had been quietly mothballed. The ships were still maintained, their crews kept in reserve, but humanity had hoped never to use them again. For 15 years, that hope had been enough. Now Kane looked around the command center of his flagship and felt the old familiar weight settling on his shoulders. The Retribution fleet was waking up, and the galaxy was about to remember why it had learned to fear them. "Signal all ships," Kane ordered. "Full activation. I want every vessel operational within 12 hours. Chen hesitated. "Sir, that will require pulling crews from across human space. The fleet has been in reserve status for—" "I know how long it's been, Commander." Kane's voice carried the cold authority that had once made enemy admirals surrender rather than face him in battle. "Send the recall signal. Every officer, every crew member who ever served on these ships. Tell them the Retribution fleet is going to war." Chen nodded and began issuing orders. Around them, the command center came alive as officers who had been keeping routine watch suddenly found themselves preparing for the largest military deployment in human history. The Retribution fleet was not just 12 ships. It was an entire battle group, with support vessels, supply lines, and intelligence networks that stretched across known space. Kane walked to the observation deck and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Hegemony Coalition was celebrating another successful operation. They thought they had silenced Dr. Vasquez and her team. They thought their secret was safe. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The first ships began arriving within hours. The destroyer Swift Justice dropped out of hyperspace, its crew already at battle stations. The cruiser Righteous Fury followed, then the battleship Inexorable Will. One by one, humanity's most dangerous warships took their positions around the flagship. Each ship carried a crew of volunteers who had given up normal lives to serve in the most feared military unit in the galaxy. They were engineers and technicians, gunners and pilots, intelligence specialists, and medical personnel. What they all had in common was a willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect innocent life. Kane watched the heavy cruiser Eternal Vigilance slide into formation and remembered its captain, David Park. Park had lost his entire family when pirates raided his home colony. He had joined the Retribution fleet not for revenge, but to make sure no other families suffered the same fate. The pirates who killed his family had been eliminated 3 years later, but Park had stayed with the fleet. Some fights were bigger than personal revenge. The assembly continued through the night. Support ships arrived to handle logistics and supply. Intelligence vessels appeared with their crews of analysts and codebreakers. Medical ships took position to handle casualties. By dawn, the entire Retribution fleet was operational for the first time in 15 years. Kane called a meeting of all ship captains in the fleet's main conference room. Holographic projections showed the faces of men and women who had served together through humanity's darkest hour. They looked older now, grayer, but their eyes still held the same cold determination that had ended the Centauri War. "You've all seen Dr. Vasquez's message?" Kane began. "You've all read the intelligence reports. The Hegemony Coalition has been systematically murdering entire civilizations for 3 centuries. They did it by pretending to be peacekeepers and protectors." The room was silent. These officers had seen enough war to know that evil often wore a pleasant mask. The galactic community will not act on this information. Kane continued. Too many governments have deals with the hegemony. Too many politicians owe them favors. Too many species are afraid of what will happen if the hegemony decides they are a threat. Captain Park spoke up from his projection. What are our orders, Admiral? Kane looked around the room at the faces of humanity's finest military officers. They had volunteered to be the monsters that other monsters feared. Now it was time to remind the galaxy why that was necessary. The hegemony coalition will be dismantled, Kane said simply. Every military installation, every government facility, every ship in their fleet. We will tear apart their entire power structure and expose their crimes to the galaxy. And if they surrender? Asked Captain Martinez of the unforgiving Dawn. Kane's expression did not change. They killed 63 civilizations, Captain. They murdered Dr. Vasquez and her team for discovering the truth. They have shown no mercy to the innocent. The room understood. The Retribution fleet did not accept surrenders from genocidal regimes. One more thing, Kane added. This operation is voluntary, even for us. Anyone who wants to transfer out can do so now. No questions asked. What we're about to do will make us pariahs in civilized space. We'll be called war criminals and butchers. Some of that will even be true. None of the captains moved. Kane nodded. He had expected no less from these people. Then it settled. Send word to Earth Command. Tell them humanity's most feared armada is answering Dr. Vasquez's SOS. As the meeting ended and the captains returned to their ships, Kane remained in the conference room. In 6 hours, the fleet would jump to hyperspace and begin its mission of revenge and justice. The galaxy would never be the same, but somewhere in space, Dr. Elena Vasquez could finally rest in peace. Her SOS had been received. Humanity was coming. Captain Zex-9 of the Hegemony Patrol Fleet Virtuous Dawn felt his crystalline core temperature drop as he stared at the sensor readings. The massive gravitational distortions approaching his position should have been impossible. His ship's computers were telling him that 12 enormous vessels were dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation. But that could not be right. Zex-9 was a member of the Vorthak species, silicon-based beings who thought in precise mathematical patterns. His crystalline body processed information faster than most organic brains, which made the current situation even more disturbing. The energy signatures his sensors were detecting matched no known ships in the galactic database, except for one possibility that made his internal temperature drop even further. Communications officer, Zex-9 clicked in the harmonic language of his people. Verify those sensor readings immediately. The communications officer, a pale humanoid from the Drellin homeworld, worked frantically at her console. Sir, I'm reading 12 massive vessels. Length approximately 2 kilometers each. Mass readings are... Sir, these ships are larger than our entire patrol fleet combined. Zex-9 felt the familiar pattern of fear begin to form in his consciousness. 3 hours ago, his fleet had finished cleaning up a minor problem. A human research vessel had been poking around where it did not belong, asking questions about civilizations that were better left forgotten. The situation had been handled with typical hegemony efficiency. The research ship and its crew had been eliminated. The official report would list it as an unfortunate accident. Hyperspace engine failure, very tragic, happens all the time. The hegemony had been using that excuse for 3 centuries, and it had always worked before. But now something was coming toward them out of the darkness between stars, and Zex-9 was beginning to suspect that their latest cleaning operation had not gone as smoothly as planned. The first ship dropped out of hyperspace with a flash of twisted spacetime that made Zex-9's sensors scream warnings. It was massive, built like a black knife designed to cut through the fabric of reality itself. Its hull was covered with armor that seemed to absorb light, making it difficult to look at directly. Red markings along its sides glowed like fresh blood. More ships followed. 11 more vessels of various sizes, all painted the same light-absorbing black, all bearing the same red insignia. They moved with the coordinated precision of a pack of predators who had hunted together for years. Zex-9 recognized that insignia from intelligence briefings. It was the crimson badge of the Terran Retribution Fleet, humanity's most feared military unit. But that was impossible. The Retribution Fleet had been disbanded years ago after the Centauri War. Everyone in the galaxy knew that. Everyone had been wrong. The lead ship opened a communication channel, broadcasting on all frequencies in the cold, mechanical voice of a ship's artificial intelligence. Hegemony vessels. This is Admiral Marcus Kane of the Terran Retribution Fleet. By order of the Human High Command, you are charged with crimes against sapient life. You have 1 minute to power down your weapons and prepare for boarding. Any attempt to flee or fight will result in your immediate destruction. The bridge of the Virtuous Dawn fell silent. Zex-9 could hear the rapid breathing of his organic crew members and the nervous humming of the ship's atmospheric processors. Everyone knew the stories about the Retribution Fleet, but they were supposed to be legends. Tales told to frighten children and keep minor species in line. Zex-9 had been present at intelligence briefings where senior hegemony officials discussed humanity. They were a young species, barely 3 centuries into space travel. Their technology was adequate but not exceptional. Their military was small and mostly defensive. They posed no real threat to the established order of the galaxy. The briefings had mentioned the Retribution Fleet as a historical curiosity, a temporary military unit created during humanity's war with the Centauri Empire. The humans had gotten lucky, the briefings explained. They had caught the Centauri at a weak moment and won through desperation rather than skill. After the war, the fleet had been quietly retired because humanity could not afford to maintain such an expensive military force. Looking at the sensor readings, Zex-9 realized that the intelligence briefings had been fatally wrong. "Sir," the communications officer said, her voice shaking. "What are your orders?" Zex-9 calculated his options with crystalline precision. The Hegemony patrol fleet consisted of 15 ships, 3 heavy cruisers, 8 destroyers, and 4 support vessels. They were well-armed and crewed by experienced soldiers. Under normal circumstances, they could handle any threat short of a full battle fleet. These were not normal circumstances. The human ships were each larger than his heaviest cruiser. Their energy signatures suggested weapons and defensive systems far beyond anything in the hegemony arsenal. Worse, they moved with the confidence of predators who knew they were stronger than their prey. But surrender was not an option. The hegemony did not tolerate failure, and allowing human ships to board and search hegemony vessels would expose secrets that had been hidden for centuries. The computers on Zex-9's ship contained records of dozens of cleaning operations, evidence of the systematic elimination of entire civilizations, proof that the hegemony coalition was built on a foundation of genocide. If that information reached the galactic community, the careful political structure that the hegemony had built would collapse overnight. Dozens of member species would rebel. Trade agreements would be canceled. The careful balance of power that kept the hegemony in control would be destroyed. Zex-9 made his decision with the cold logic of his silicon-based brain. The patrol fleet would fight. They would probably die, but at least they would take their secrets with them. The ship's computers would be destroyed before the humans could access them. "All ships," Zex-9 transmitted to his fleet. "Battle stations. Prepare to engage the human vessels. Remember your duty to the coalition." The response was immediate. 15 hegemony ships powered up their weapons and began moving into attack formation. Their plasma batteries glowed green as they charged, and torpedo tubes loaded with antimatter warheads. The hegemony had been the dominant military force in the galaxy for 3 centuries. They did not back down from fights. The human ships did not seem impressed. Admiral Kane's voice came over the communication channel again, still cold and mechanical. "So be it. All ships, you are cleared to engage. Show them why the galaxy learned to fear us." The hegemony fleet fired first. 15 ships unleashed their full firepower in a coordinated barrage that should have been enough to destroy a small planet. Green plasma bolts streaked through space like miniature stars, followed by waves of antimatter torpedoes that could crack a moon in half. The human ships simply absorbed it all. Their black armor seemed to drink the incoming fire, converting the energy into something harmless. Point defense systems that moved too fast for organic eyes to follow swatted the torpedoes aside like annoying insects. The massive human vessels did not even slow down. Instead, they accelerated. Zex-9 watched in growing horror as the human ships began to move faster than should have been possible for vessels of their size. They flowed through space like liquid death, their formation never breaking, their course never wavering. They were coming straight for his fleet, and nothing he could do was going to stop them. The lead human ship, the one Admiral Kane commanded, finally returned fire. The weapon that struck the heavy cruiser Righteous Purpose was unlike anything Zex-9 had ever seen. It was not a plasma bolt or a kinetic projectile. It seemed to be pure energy given form, a lance of white-hot destruction that reached out across space faster than light itself. The Righteous Purpose simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there. 2 kilometers of advanced hegemony technology crewed by 400 experienced soldiers. The next moment there was just empty space and a rapidly expanding cloud of superheated atoms. The sight broke something in Zex-9's crystalline mind. The Righteous Purpose had been one of the most advanced ships in the hegemony fleet, equipped with shields and armor that could withstand the combined firepower of a dozen lesser vessels. The humans had erased it with a single shot. "All ships, retreat," Zex-9 transmitted, his harmonic voice cracking with something that might have been panic. "Emergency hyperspace jump. Get us out of here!" But it was too late. The human ships had spread out, surrounding the hegemony fleet in a formation that blocked all escape routes. More lances of energy reached out from the black vessels, and more hegemony ships vanished in flashes of white light. The destroyer Quickstrike tried to run, pushing its engines beyond safe limits in a desperate attempt to reach the edge of the gravity well, where it could jump to hyperspace. The human cruiser. Unforgiving dawn caught it before it had traveled 1,000 kilometers. The destroyer's death was quick and complete. Zex-9 realized that his own ship was the primary target of the human flagship. The massive black dreadnought was moving directly toward the virtuous dawn, its weapons charging for another shot. He had perhaps 30 seconds before he joined his fellow captains in death. He used the time to activate the ship's data destruction protocol. Every computer on the ship began wiping itself, erasing 3 centuries of carefully hidden records. The evidence of the hegemony's crimes would die with them, or so he thought. Admiral Kane's voice. The news spread through the galaxy like a virus, jumping from world to world through the quantum communication networks that connected civilized space. On 1,000 planets, beings who had lived their entire lives under hegemony protection suddenly learned that their protectors were actually their greatest threat. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, a young Thraxian named Keth-7 was working the deep excavation sites when the emergency broadcast reached his people. The Thraxians were a peaceful species, barely 4 feet tall with thick gray skin adapted for high-gravity environments. They had joined the galactic community 50 years ago under hegemony guidance. Keth-7 stopped his mining equipment and listened to the translation of Dr. Vasquez's final message. The human woman's desperate voice echoed through the mining tunnels as she described the evidence her team had found. 63 civilizations systematically eliminated. Entire species wiped from existence by the very people who claimed to protect them. When the message ended, Keth-7 looked around at his fellow workers. They all had the same expression of shocked understanding. The hegemony had been on Kepler 442b for 20 years now, slowly taking over government functions and making cultural changes. They said it was for the Thraxians' own good, to help them integrate better with galactic society. Now the Thraxians understood what integration really meant. Similar scenes were playing out across hundreds of worlds. On the ocean planet of Aquatica Prime, the dolphin-like Citani were holding emergency council meetings in their underwater cities. The hegemony had arrived 3 years ago, claiming that the Citani needed help managing their population growth. They had built floating platforms above the ocean surface and started implementing new breeding regulations. The Citani had trusted them. After all, the hegemony were the galaxy's peacekeepers. They would never hurt innocent people. The evidence said otherwise. High Counselor Reefsinger called an emergency session of the Citani Parliament. Through the bioluminescent patterns that served as their written language, she shared the intelligence reports that were flooding in from across the galaxy. The pattern of hegemony operations was becoming clear, and it was terrifyingly consistent. First contact. Offers of help and protection. Gradual integration into hegemony systems. Cultural modification. Population control. Then for species that posed any kind of threat or possessed valuable resources, came the final solution. The hegemony called it pacification. The rest of the galaxy was learning to call it genocide. But the most shocking news was not the evidence of hegemony crimes. It was the response to those crimes. Humanity's most feared armada had returned from the dead, and they were methodically hunting down every hegemony facility in known space. Fleet Admiral Voss Prime of the Hegemony High Command stood in the central strategy room on the fortress world of Krath 7, watching tactical displays that showed disaster after disaster. Red warning lights flashed as one after another of his patrol fleets simply vanished from the communication network. Voss Prime was old, even by the standards of his long-lived species. He had been commanding hegemony forces for over 2 centuries, overseeing dozens of successful pacification campaigns. He understood military strategy and political manipulation better than almost anyone in the galaxy, but he did not understand what was happening now. "Report," he commanded his intelligence chief, a nervous Sclarian with multiple arms that were currently trembling with stress. "Sir, we have lost contact with 17 patrol fleets in the past 6 hours, the Sclarian reported. The last transmission from the Virtuous Dawn showed them engaging human vessels of unknown configuration. Then nothing. Voss Prime studied the tactical display. The human attacks were following a clear pattern, striking isolated hegemony outposts and patrol fleets throughout the outer sectors. But these were not random raids. The humans were systematically eliminating every hegemony presence in an expanding sphere of space. "What do we know about these human ships?" Voss Prime asked. The intelligence chief consulted his data pad with shaking hands. "Very little, sir. The energy signatures match theoretical projections for the old Terran Retribution fleet, but that unit was disbanded 15 years ago. Our intelligence sources confirmed it." Voss Prime felt a cold certainty settling in his mind. The hegemony's intelligence network was vast and sophisticated, but it had a critical flaw. They had never really paid attention to humanity. Humans were too young, too small, too irrelevant to matter in the grand scheme of galactic politics. That had been a mistake. "Send a priority message to all fleet commanders," Voss Prime ordered. "Full mobilization. Recall all ships to defensive positions around critical worlds, and send a diplomatic message to the human high command. Perhaps we can negotiate a solution to this misunderstanding." The intelligence chief looked skeptical. "Sir, with respect, I do not think this is a misunderstanding. The humans are broadcasting Dr. Vasquez's evidence on every frequency. They are calling for the complete dismantling of the hegemony coalition." Voss Prime's expression hardened. The hegemony had built their power carefully over 3 centuries. They had eliminated threats, absorbed useful species, and maintained order throughout a significant portion of the galaxy. They were not going to give up that power because one human research team had uncovered some old records. "Then we will show them why the hegemony has remained in power for so long," Voss Prime said. "Prepare the defense fleets. If humanity wants a war, we will give them one they will not survive." But even as he gave the orders, Voss Prime could see the tactical situation deteriorating. The human fleet was moving faster than should have been possible, striking targets throughout hegemony space simultaneously. They seemed to know exactly where every hegemony facility was located, as if they had been planning this campaign for years. On the industrial world of Factorum 9, the massive orbital platforms that produced hegemony military equipment were burning in space. The human attack had come without warning. 12 black ships dropping out of hyperspace and systematically destroying 3 centuries' worth of military infrastructure. The platform supervisors had tried to surrender, broadcasting on all frequencies that they were non-combatants just doing their jobs. The human response had been swift and merciless. Every platform that had ever produced weapons used in hegemony pacification campaigns was reduced to scrap metal floating in the void. On the border world of Terminus Station, the hegemony's largest intelligence-gathering facility was under siege. The station commander, a veteran operative named Quill 9, watched through his security cameras as human soldiers moved through his base with terrifying efficiency. These were not the regular crew members of the human fleet. These were specialists, trained for exactly this kind of operation. They moved like ghosts through the station's corridors, their black armor making them almost invisible in the shadows. Their weapons made no sound when they fired, but hegemony personnel simply collapsed when the beams touched them. Quill 9 had commanded intelligence operations for 60 years. He had overseen the elimination of dozens of potential threats to hegemony security. He knew how to handle insurgents and rebels. But these human soldiers were something different. They fought like machines designed for killing, without emotion or hesitation. The humans reached the central data core within an hour of boarding the station. Quill 9 tried to activate the data destruction protocol, but the human specialists had already bypassed his security systems. Centuries of intelligence records, detailed files on every pacification campaign, lists of species marked for elimination. All of it was being copied and transmitted to the human fleet. Quill 9 reached for his sidearm, intending to die fighting rather than face capture. A human soldier appeared behind him like a shadow and touched him with some kind of neural disruptor. Quill 9 collapsed, paralyzed but conscious, forced to watch as his life's work was stolen by the very species he had dismissed as irrelevant. The pattern repeated itself across hegemony space. Military bases, research facilities, government centers, intelligence stations, all of them fell to the systematic assault of the human fleet. The hegemony's carefully built infrastructure was being dismantled piece by piece, but the humans were not just destroying hegemony facilities. They were rescuing the survivors of hegemony operations wherever they found them. On the prison world of Correction 7, 10,000 beings from dozens of different species had been held in rehabilitation centers, while hegemony scientists studied them for weaknesses. The human fleet arrived like angels of vengeance, their black ships descending from orbit to liberate prisoners who had given up hope of ever seeing freedom again. Dr. Nix Vala, of the Andorian species, had been imprisoned on Correction 7 for 5 years. Her crime had been publishing research that suggested the hegemony's cultural modification programs were causing psychological damage to subject populations. The hegemony had labeled her a dangerous radical and sentenced her to rehabilitation. When the human soldiers broke down the door to her cell, Dr. Nix Vala thought she was hallucinating. The armored figures looked like something from a nightmare, their weapons and equipment clearly designed for war rather than rescue. But their leader removed his helmet, revealing a esky. 6 months after Dr. Elena Vasquez sent her desperate SOS into the void, the galaxy was a fundamentally different place. The massive orbital platforms above the former hegemony capital world of Krath 7 were now cooling debris floating in space, their destruction marking the end of 3 centuries of hidden genocide. Admiral Marcus Kane stood in the observation deck of the Ragnarok's edge, looking down at the planet that had once been the center of the most powerful military organization in known space. The surface was unmarked. The Retribution fleet had been precise in their targeting, destroying only military and government facilities while leaving civilian populations untouched. But the political structure that had ruled from this world was gone forever. The final battle had lasted 18 hours. The hegemony had assembled the largest fleet in galactic history to defend their homeworld, over 3,000 ships from dozens of member species. It should have been enough to overwhelm any enemy force. It had not been enough to stop 12 human dreadnoughts and their supporting vessels. The hegemony commanders had fought bravely, Kane admitted to himself. They had used tactics and strategies refined over centuries of warfare. They had weapons and shields that represented the pinnacle of galactic technology. They had numerical superiority and the advantage of fighting on their home ground. But they had been fighting an enemy they fundamentally did not understand. The Retribution fleet had been designed for one purpose: to ensure that humanity's enemies learned the price of threatening innocent life. The ships were not just weapons platforms. They were statements of intent, built to be absolutely unstoppable when committed to battle. The hegemony fleet had learned this too late. Kane walked away from the observation deck and made his way to the communications center. It was time to send his final report to Earth Command, officially ending the largest military operation in human history. "This is Admiral Kane of the Terran Retribution Fleet," he said into the recording device. "Mission objectives have been achieved. The Hegemony Coalition military structure has been dismantled. All war criminals identified in Dr. Vasquez's evidence have been captured or eliminated. The threat to galactic civilization has been neutralized." He paused, thinking of the price that had been paid. Not just by his own forces, the Retribution fleet had lost only 3 ships in 6 months of fighting, but by the galaxy as a whole. The revelation of hegemony crimes had shattered the political order that had maintained peace for generations. However, Kane continued, "Our mission has created a power vacuum that will need to be addressed. 17 member species of the former coalition have requested Human Federation protection while they reorganize their governments. 43 worlds have asked for assistance in rebuilding after years of hegemony occupation. The galaxy is looking to us for leadership." That was the unexpected consequence of their victory. Humanity had set out to expose and punish war criminals. Instead, they had accidentally become the dominant military power in known space. Species that had lived under hegemony rule for centuries were now free, but they had no idea how to govern themselves. Kane finished his report and sent it through the quantum communication network toward Earth. The politicians could figure out what to do next. His job was done. But even as he prepared to stand down the Retribution fleet, Kane knew that the galaxy would never be the same. The careful balance of power that had existed for centuries was broken. New alliances were forming, old enemies were becoming friends, and everyone was trying to figure out what humanity's victory meant for the future. On the water world of Aquatica Prime, High Counselor Reefsinger was meeting with representatives from 12 other species who had been liberated from hegemony control. The cetacean leader's bioluminescent patterns showed cautious optimism as she addressed the gathered delegates. "The humans have given us something precious," she said through the translation, devices that allowed the different species to communicate. "They have given us the truth. Now we must decide what to do with it." The representatives came from worlds across the former hegemony territory. Some were old civilizations that had been slowly absorbed by the coalition over decades. Others were young species that had known no other reality than hegemony rule. All of them were struggling to understand their new freedom. "The question before us is simple," continued Reefsinger. "Do we try to rebuild the old system with new leadership, or do we create something entirely different?" The delegate from the Thraxian mining world spoke up. "The old system was built on lies and murder. We cannot simply replace the hegemony with another hegemony and expect different results." There were murmurs of agreement from around the chamber. The evidence that Dr. Vasquez had died to preserve had shown them exactly how the hegemony had maintained their power: fear, manipulation, and the systematic elimination of anyone who posed a threat. No one wanted to repeat that pattern. "Then what do you propose?" asked the representative from the industrial world of Factorum 9. The Thraxian delegate looked around the chamber before answering. "We propose following the human example. Voluntary cooperation between equals. No species has the right to rule over another. No government has the authority to decide which civilizations deserve to exist." It was a radical idea by galactic standards. For thousands of years, the galaxy had been organized around hierarchies of power. Strong species ruled over weak ones. Advanced civilizations guided primitive ones. The idea that all sapient life had equal value was revolutionary, but it was also the principle that humanity had fought for during their war against the hegemony. On Earth, President Chen was dealing with similar questions on a much larger scale. The complete victory of the Retribution fleet had made humanity the most feared military power in the galaxy, but it had also made them responsible for the aftermath. "Ma'am," her chief of staff said as he entered the presidential office, "we've received formal requests for protection from 47 different worlds. They want Human Federation military bases on their planets." President Chen rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of unwanted responsibility. "What does Admiral Kane recommend?" "He says the fleet can provide protection for critical worlds, but we don't have enough ships to garrison 47 different systems. He's requesting permission to begin construction of additional vessels." The president considered this. Building more warships would make humanity even more dominant militarily, but it would also make them look like potential conquerors to species who were already nervous about human power. "What about the other major powers?" she asked. "The Centauri Empire, the Silicon Consortium, the Free Traders Alliance? What are they saying about all this?" Her chief of staff consulted his data pad. Mixed reactions. "The Centauri are staying neutral. They remember what happened the last time they fought us. The Silicon Consortium is offering to help with reconstruction efforts. The Free Traders are actually celebrating. They say breaking up the hegemony monopoly will be good for business." President Chen walked to the window and looked out at the skyline of New Geneva. Somewhere in the distance, she could see the construction sites where new ships were already being built. The galaxy had changed, and humanity would have to change with it. "Send a message to all the worlds requesting protection," she decided. "Tell them we will provide security assistance, but only as part of a mutual defense alliance. We're not interested in building an empire." "What about the former hegemony leadership?" her chief of staff asked. "The war crimes tribunals are requesting guidance on sentencing." That was another difficult decision. The trials had been going on for months, with hundreds of former hegemony officials facing charges related to genocide and crimes against sapient life. The evidence was overwhelming, But the question of punishment was complicated. Follow galactic law, President Chen said finally. Life imprisonment for those directly involved in the killings. Rehabilitation for those who were just following orders. And make sure the trials are public. The galaxy needs to see that justice is being done. On Luna Station, in the memorial garden that had been built to honor Dr. Vasquez and her team, Admiral Kane stood before a simple stone marker that bore the names of 17 scientists who had died to expose the truth. The garden was peaceful, filled with plants from dozens of different worlds that had been liberated from hegemony rule. Kane was no longer in uniform. The Retribution fleet had been officially disbanded again, its mission complete. The ships were being converted back to their peacetime roles, and the crews were returning to their normal lives. Kane himself had retired from active duty, though he remained available as an advisor to the Human Federation military. "Admiral," a voice said behind him. Kane turned to see Dr. Nix Vala, the Andorian scientist who had been rescued from Correction 7. She was carrying a small flowering plant that Kane recognized as native to her homeworld. "Doctor," Kane replied, "I didn't expect to see you here." Dr. Nix Vala approached the memorial and carefully planted the flower next to the stone marker. "I wanted to thank them," she said simply. "Dr. Vasquez and her team saved my life and the lives of thousands of others. The least I can do is make sure their sacrifice is remembered." Kane nodded. "They'll be remembered. The galaxy is making sure of that." And it was true.